welcome back to part 2 of the Quintessential Fall Jams series here on the Her Life BLOGCAST with my co-host, Kevin Verga. Thank you for joining us once again.
Co-host. Wow.
It just, I don't know, it felt right.
I've been upgraded.
I mean, listen, you've been here probably as much as Emma, right? Like, you guys are like the top 2 recurring guests at this point, I would say.
Wow. Last week I was marketing manager, and now I'm co-host, so I'm rising up through the ranks.
It's a beautiful thing to witness, the evolution that can happen here on the show.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome back. I want to kick off, since today is November 1st, I want to start with some November intention setting. I'll go first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I have a simple one and I have kind of a more complex one. My simple one is to drink more water, because I'm not drinking a lot of water, and this helps me stay accountable so I can revisit this episode and drink more freaking water. Second of all, I want to talk kind of about the election, because here we are, you know, it's the week. This is a big time for us Americans, and I think it can be very stress-inducing, and I think depending on when people are even listening to this episode in the layout of the week, a lot could be different right now. Regardless, I think a lot will be different, and I think my challenge and the challenge of lots of Americans this November will be to shift our perspectives accordingly and to try to make this, regardless of the election outcome, the most productive term 4 years that we can. I think focusing on progress is always a positive thing, and we can do that in numbers, which I think we've seen throughout quarantine, especially, and with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, we see what positive changes can be made. I hope to God that will result in a new president. But if it doesn't, I think hopefully it will just encourage us to work together all the more and make some changes. And I think that obviously we're talking very big scale here. You can apply that on a smaller scale to your life as well.
Yeah, it is the time to do the election thing, right? Yeah. Wow, that's right. Wild. The old.
We're recording a little bit ahead of time, but I'm trying to anticipate what my feelings will be then.
Yeah, I think I'm doing a good job of mimicking my feelings now, because I'm just at a loss for words, and the future seems uncertain, and that's election season for me. Coffin season, election season, it's all just one and the same for me. Confusion and sadness and hope for the future.
Yeah. The heartbreak. Yeah. I feel that.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Should I go into my...
Yeah, tell me, what are your intentions for November?
What are your intentions with my November? My intentions are... I mean... I don't know. Early November is so wild, you know?
I'm so sorry.
But, I think that I will just... I have no idea. I have no idea. I think I love this idea of November intentions.
It's okay.
I really have no idea. I think I'm gonna take it day by day, every day.
It's a good intention.
And I think that's my intention, because I really have no idea what's going to happen.
It's true. It's really hard to say. Like,
my goal is to just, you know, keep my family and myself safe so that we can have a nice Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah, I think that's my intention. It's just to have a nice Thanksgiving dinner, and hopefully the NFL is still going and we'll be able to go to supermarkets and just have a nice meal. Yeah.
I think that's a great intention, and I hope that for you too.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive back into our fall jams analysis. If you missed last week, we'll give you a quick, catch up on what we talked about. Kevin and I each picked a quintessentially fall jam, and we started the discussion about essentially heartbreak and nostalgia, and also cuffing season. So that's what you missed in part 1. If that sounds tantalizing to you, you might want to go back and give it a listen. I think it was a pretty good discussion, but I'm excited to dive a little deeper.
Me too.
So do you want to start, where do you want to begin? Do you want to start with your song? Do you want me to kick it in? Well, I have a thing that I want to say, so I'll start there maybe. Okay. So a theme that I noticed about both of these songs is that the heartbreak that has transpired has somehow, even if for just a short time, fundamentally transformed the heartbroken person. In Taylor Swift's song, she has a lyric, "I'd like to be my old self again, but I'm still trying to find it." And then she talks about his plaid shirts, and it's a more beautiful imagery that we talked about last week. And in the Strokes song, we have that lyric about his ex says he lacks depth. So I imagine that,
my best. Yeah.
right, that the depth was once there.
Yeah.
It's lost now. What triggered the loss? What does that mean? I don't know. I think that's maybe the most tragic part about the songs, is that a heartbreak, a love affair, has the potential to change you. Because I think love has that, right? And we talked about the difference between like heartbreak and love, and how which is more impactful in our High Fidelity episode. And I think that conversation applies here as well. Like, both have the opportunity to change you. Maybe for better, maybe for worse, but certainly change you, right?
Yeah. Well, I like that lyric. The lyric you said from All Too Well
Mm-hmm.
is one that I'd like to focus on,
Okay.
but maybe put it up on a shelf because I have
Okay.
something that I want to introduce with my song
Okay.
Dive. But I like that one. I'd like to be my old self again, but I'm still trying to find it. So if I could hop into Someday,
Please do.
specifically, Is This It? So we can get back to that line. So Is This It? Released in 2001. Not an initial overwhelming success, but has since become one of the most pivotal albums of the 21st century. Just to get an idea of who the Strokes were and who they've become, let's flash back to 2000, the year 2000, the year before Is This It came out. Some of the most popular songs and bands were Bye 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 by NSYNC, Hit Me Baby One More Time by Britney Spears, and Who Let the Dogs Out by the Baha Men. No shade to those songs. They were poppy, they were good for early internet jams. I'm sure they're well downloaded on Napster. Cut to 2004, the year after the Strokes released their second album, Room on Fire. Some of those popular groups were no longer NSYNC and the Baha Men, but the Arctic Monkeys, Kings of Leon, the Fratellis, Hives, Vines, Franz Ferdinand, Interpol, The Killers. What the hell happened? Why is nu metal and Limp Bizkit of the early 2000s no longer popular? A lot of people attribute it to the Strokes releasing of Is This It, which started the quote-unquote garage rock revival. It made guitar music cool again. It wasn't really cool. It was kind of not cool anymore. I think it ran its course from the 50s through the 90s, kind of after Nirvana, the grunge era. People were like, I want to hear electronic music. I want to hear pop music. And for a long time, that's what there was. It still continued, but the Strokes are credited for launching not only their own really impressive career with their run of albums, but influencing really popular rock bands, and we're still feeling the ripples of that release today.
Wow.
Also, it was released in the fall of 2001 in New York. Obviously, the fall of 2001 following 9/11 was a very influential time in America. People were looking for something to rally around, especially in New York, and the Strokes were a big part of that. So that's the band. The album Is This It? On it is Someday. I think Someday is a perfect song, and we can get to that when we get to it. But do you have any response to that?
I just didn't realize, and it's very interesting to me. I'll admit, I don't consider myself the biggest Strokes fan, but I definitely have a larger appreciation, one, after hearing that, but also just knowing you, passion that you feel for the Strokes is infectious, my friend, and I feel like I've started listening more as a result. You've referenced them quite a bit over the episodes and throughout our friendship, and it's just interesting to see how the music industry can change quickly, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't have much to say other than that.
Yeah. Some cool like facts I like from Strokes documentaries and things I've listened to. One is that they made tight jeans, cuff jeans, Converse, and carrying a guitar case on the street cool again when it was cool for a while. And now, you see that in hipster Brooklyn. Everyone loves it.
I'm laughing because we're returning to cuffing season. Once
Yeah.
again, just in a different class.
Well, when I think cuffing season, that I'm talking about cuffing my jeans. What are you talking
Oh, wait a minute. The levels we're at right now, I appreciate. Wow, that's wild. But interesting how, like, right. And I think music has the potential to change not only pop culture, but like culture. Not
Yeah.
like culture. That sounded dumb, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying that it sounded dumb, but
No, but right.
I'm
Music
agreeing
is
with you.
culture. Music isn't just pop culture, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Another fact I like is The Killers, a very popular band that we still listen to now. They were making their music right after Is This It came out. And they
Mm-hmm.
had like demos they were sending out, and then they listened to Is This It, and they got rid of everything on that album except for Mr. Brightside. They're like, that one's good, that one can stay. And then everything on Hot Fuss they wiped clean and made a totally new album because they're like, we're not even close to what we should be. So the Strokes just raised the bar.
They
They're
really
good.
did. Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
And I think what I like about them the most is that you listen to that album and there's nothing really hard on it. It just makes you want to play music. Like everything's very linear. The guitar parts are just choppy, the drum parts are easy. It just
Mm-hmm.
makes you want to start a band, hence the garage rock revival. It makes you want to go out and play music, and that's what they did. So
Yeah,
that's what I love about the Strokes
that's
as
a
a
beautiful
musician and a
thing.
listener. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think that, like I said, really enriches my appreciation, my budding appreciation for the Strokes. And I want to dive in deeper, just knowing the facts.
Fantastic. I love to hear that.
I love it. I want to ask you, is there any one like standout lyric from this song that you want to, I don't know, that you think speaks to the fall vibes, perhaps, or
Absolutely. I have one
okay.
specifically. Well, firstly, I like the poetic nature of both titles we have. There's something I love finding poetry in just simple phrases.
Yeah.
So all too well is just a great cadence. It's something that people say in conversation, and also someday. They're loaded. They're kind of loaded words.
Mhm.
And that they're like you can kind of just throw them out there willy nilly, but there's like almost an underlying aspect of
Yeah.
it's all too well. It's like a little. It's kind of like I don't know, something sinister almost below
That
it.
yes. Good word. That's a good. I was trying to place it, but I think that's really strong. Sinister.
Yeah, like
Spooky
when will things
season.
get better? Someday, someday they'll get better. Oh, is it? It's not specific, but it's also hopeful. But also, obviously, it's not where we want to be right
Mhm.
now. Someday.
Mhm.
So in terms of lyrics, I love the first lyric of "In many ways, we'll miss the good old days. Someday, someday." I just like that idea of wherever you are in your life, whatever struggles you're going to, whether it be heartbreak, plagues upon humanity, breakups, job losses, eventually we'll miss those days
Mhm.
someday. So it's almost like we're working in multiple time frames and that
Mhm.
we're in the future or we're in the present experiencing this heartbreak, but we would know that when we get to the future, we'll actually look back upon this bad time and miss it, which is
Mhm.
odd. It's a weird human phenomenon. So we're predicting this change of heart.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right,
And
which I think makes things like heartbreak easier to deal with on the one hand, but I also like how in this line it says in many ways, which is to say not always,
yeah,
acknowledging the pain and the tragedy that is existing in this moment, but also acknowledging that that's not the only part of it.
yeah,
Everything is so multifaceted, and I think that's what makes phrases like the titles and lyrics like this all the more weighty.
yeah. And I like how it's we'll miss the good old days. It's not just I will be wrong or I will have a fallacy that makes me look back upon this positively.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the frames of the song, it's a heartbreak. So hopefully we'll look back as me and you. But then also collectively as a human race, we're going to all look back on this and wish we appreciated more or think it was, see the good times that we
Totally.
had during these tough times.
Yeah, it's a beautiful message. A message of unity.
Yeah.
Election season.
Yeah.
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 Times are weird, man. But no, I think, yeah, I agree. To shift gears a little bit back to All Too Well, I think one of my favorite parts about this song is the way that the story builds. And also, I want to get your music interpretation of it because the song itself is weird. Me, knowing very little about music theory, knows that, recognizes it. There's not the chorus that we would expect of the exact same lyrics repeating 3 or 4 times throughout the course of the song. Instead, Taylor Swift builds upon the imagery she creates and just takes us through the entire narrative of the relationship, right? So, and then I think it like culminates in the lyrics about she's a crumpled up piece of paper at the end, and it like the climax of the song is the heartbreak. And I think that's an interesting way to position it, and it's just interesting how the verses and the do you still call it a chorus? I'm sorry if this is a dumb question, but like because it's not the exact same thing, like she in lieu of a chorus, she just paints increasingly intimate portraits of the relationship.
Yeah, I'm really noticing that now that there's no, it's not. Maybe this is why in the last episodes you said that she felt that the song was just gonna pass by.
Mm-hmm.
There's no chorus that is gonna get caught in people's heads or gonna get played in Macy's changing rooms.
Exactly.
She really only repeats, and I know it's long gone,
Mm-hmm.
and that just kind of leads into the chorus part,
Mm-hmm.
this chorus flavor or aspect that we
We
have,
would expect
but
it,
it's
right?
not super catchy. But that's almost the appeal of it, in that it's
Yeah. And I think it speaks right to like the hyper specific messages that make the song such a brilliant example of storytelling. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what it is. More, I would say, more than a song, this is a narrative. I guess you could argue that all songs are narratives, but that's the heart of the song and why I think it's created this new life for itself that's lasted a decade and that people really cling to. And I don't know if that would have been possible within the cookie cutter kind of structure that we expect from someone like Taylor Swift, who has been known for the top 40 kind of stuff that she's produced. I mean, she started as a country artist, but she succeeded as a country artist because of the crossover into pop, and she was played on all the top 40 kind of stuff. And that's what made her a success. So to take such a departure and for that to be the thing that, again, Taylor Swift fans, if you ask anyone, I guarantee they're going to tell you All Too Well is the best song in her catalog, discography.
She took a risk here. I mean, this wasn't what a company person, an industry leader is gonna say. This is what's gonna make you millions of dollars. This was her speaking from experience, and I think that's something positive that Taylor, can be given to Taylor here. And I also felt like that is similar when I think of the Strokes album. They took a risk in that they weren't going in trying to make new metal or be someone they weren't trying to make pop music. They really took a nostalgic approach and went back to the 60s and 80s and 70s of the Velvet Underground and Blondie and Talking Heads and just did what they want to do, what they liked.
Right.
And this very lo-fi feeling when you turn this Is This It on, it's not polished. It sounds like you're listening through underwater at certain parts because they compress all the audio. And people said it was the least professional sounding album they've ever heard. But they did it because they cared about it. Obviously, both songs just flowed out of these artists and they crafted it and cut it and made it into something they wanted to say. And I think that's why audiences responded so massively and culturally to both of these artists and albums. So, again, it's not, these albums were released over a decade apart, but they cause cultural shifts.
Yeah. It's wild to think about. And I think, drawing upon what you just said, there's something to be said for, I think, maybe authenticating this feeling of catharsis and the creative catharsis that both of these songs and you could say albums represent, where it was kind of against the grain and maybe unexpected, but it very much speaks to a certain feeling that the artists, respectively, needed to get out. And the way they do that is creatively. And I don't know, I think the success of each of them and why we're talking about them at such great length right now just shows, I guess, how important that is. And I think it's a good reminder, like that's what music is for, right? For catharsis and to hope that other people can relate and to, I don't know, just work through it, I guess.
Yeah, I think it just shows how much people value authenticity.
Yeah.
Both of these artists moved away from pop music, like bubblegum pop, Taylor Swift in her own career and the Strokes in the early 2000s music. And there's nothing wrong with pop music to sell records and to have people feel good, but people responded so intimately to
Mhm.
these authentic singer-songwriter uh, tales that they kind of wove in both these songs. So I think it's just a nice, reassuring event to see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And I can only imagine how inspiring it is to next generations of artists too, to have examples of the off-brand success to go off of.
yeah. I think a good example is like Billie Eilish. I think people love Billie Eilish because she's so unapologetically herself.
Mhm.
And then I just saw her cover a Stroke song. She covered Chances. I was like,
Wow.
oh, there you go. She values authenticity. I wonder if she has Taylor Swift covers out there. I'm sure when
I
she
bet
picked
you
up a
will.
guitar in the past, she probably listened to that as well.
Yeah.
So,
Very
but
cool.
she's
It's
also
interesting.
a quote unquote pop musician. I mean, she's top 40.
Right. It's also interesting to see how top 40 music changes with what people are craving at certain times. Like to watch that, even with what you said about going from NSYNC to the pivot.
Pivot.
Like, we love a pivot.
We love a
Did you
pivot.
want to say anything? There was a line. Didn't you want to revisit? We put something on a shelf. Do you want to
Oh,
revisit
okay.
that before we?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So I link these two. Okay, so going off, trying to connect the lines of, in many ways, we'll miss the good old days someday, with the all too well line of, I'd like to be my old self again, but I'm still trying to find it. I made up a phrase that I've been thinking about for a long time. It may have already been scientifically observed, culturally observed, but I think about this a lot. And I labeled it earlier today the entropy fallacy.
Okay.
So entropy, I'm gonna do my best to explain because I'm not an expert, is a thermodynamic physical principle. And a definition would be that it's a gradual, observable decline into disorder that
Okay.
happens over time. If we graphed entropy and made the x-axis time and the y-axis disorder, it'd go up over time in a straight line, maybe at a 45-degree angle. That's what I would say in most situations. This can be observed in the universe. We start at a not entropic time of the Big Bang, where everything is consolidated into a single point. That is all existence is right there. It's you can observe it, it's right there. Then the Big Bang explodes, and there's just space guts everywhere, swirling around, molten hot, flying all over the place. And it just gets bigger and bigger, and now, billions of years later, we have a ever expanding cooling universe that is harder to predict. We can't hold it in a teaspoon anymore where the Big Bang before the Big Bang was. It is ever expanding, and as time goes on, the universe is expanding. So we can observe that on a single level of that. We look at ourselves and we think back, wow, when I was younger, my life was so simple. I wish I could get back to that. I'd like to be my old self again, because I'm still trying to find this disorder of my life now. So as time goes on, we look back at a literally, physically simpler time, and we want to get back to it. But then as we progress more, the time we just left is simpler comparatively. So we just keep pining for the past. And if I can make a more cultural assumption, I think this is why conservatism is so popular. Because we look at the 1950s and say, wow, times were so simple back then. That's when they really understood it.
Mhm.
Times are more chaotic now, and it's not because we're doing something wrong, but because it just physically can't be how it was. So there's no point of pining for the past. You can look to it, but I
Mhm.
think that's why like the whole "Make America Great Again," people look to the past. That purity and order is in the past, and it's not wrong. It's right in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
Time was simpler because it just, as time goes on, disorder is created. So anyway, the opposite of that would be progressive thought and say that hope lies in the future, and I hope in many ways we'll miss the good old days in the future, and that's when we'll figure it all out. That was a long tangent, but
No.
the entropy fallacy, I think it applies to both and connects both songs.
I completely agree, and that's very interesting. I also think it's fascinating and maybe worth another episode one day to talk about how a relationship, a failed relationship, could be a microcosm for like American politics. That's wild.
Question
that's a,
mark?
that's an interesting, and you made a lot of good points, and I think I'd be interested to parse it out even more. Wow. There's always something very unexpected that comes from you, Kevin, and that was today's. How do we get there? I appreciate it, though.
Yeah.
The
Buy my
Entropy
book,
Fallacy.
How Does My Love Life Equal American Politics? It's in Target bookstores now in the clearance section. So, yeah.
Interesting. Wow. I don't know what else to say. Do you have any other points that you're dying to make about either?
Enough about that, whatever that was.
No, I truly,
Move on.
really appreciate that. That was very interesting. I would have never come up with that.
Well, I just try to avoid, I just try to keep it in my mind. I don't try to avoid it. I just kind of
Yeah.
accept that it's there. And I think back to when Is This It, the album, was on my radar the most.
Okay.
And I think back to the fall of my senior year of college. And I have images in my head of beautiful leaf foliage and walking around campus and just listening to that album because I was a senior. I was trying to be as cool and smart as possible,
Mm-hmm.
and things were going pretty well. But when things are going well, you're working really hard to get them. I was in a good relationship. I had good friends. I started the band. I was listening to Strokes records because I wanted to learn guitar and drums, and it was all going well. And I look back on that time so fondly, like it's so different than now. And
Mm-hmm.
in ways it was simpler. I was in college. I wasn't contained within the gates of Fordham.
Mm-hmm.
But I forget how tired I was, how spread thin, how oftentimes I felt very confused and nervous about the future and burnt out. But
Mm-hmm.
all those parts just faded away. I have to physically remember those parts and make an effort, while the happy things are so easily present. And
Yeah.
in many ways, I miss the good old days today. Today.
Yeah. That's very well said and interesting, and to think about nostalgia in that way. But also, I have a slight rebuttal, I guess, of the cynical way, I guess, I'm thinking about nostalgia lately, specifically within the framework of All Too Well, because I love that song so much. And I think right now, when it came out, I was in the ninth grade and I didn't know anything about anything. And I just thought, like, okay, that was probably a song that I skipped. Now I resonate with the song more. And I think there are moments of my life that maybe I'm like, oh my God, this could be my like dancing in the refrigerator light in the middle of the night moment.
Mm.
Oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I get what Taylor's talking about. This could be something really great, right? But I'm already, because I'm like, Taylor told me things are gonna go wrong and it's gonna destroy me. Like, I think about it ahead of time, which I think is like a flaw that maybe I have to work through. But do you know what I'm saying? I think it's interesting to look at the other side of it, where it's like, it's gonna go bad. Warn yourself. Like, for as good as things can be, it's gonna be sad in the end, which is a sad way to look at the world. But it's something that I can't not think about lately.
Well, it kind of could be like a reverse bell curve, and there's a few lessons in that. I
Mm,
think Taylor does a good job of not hyping up love too much and
yeah,
making it overly romantic. She really just shows really nice, realistic approaches to a relationship.
yeah,
And yeah, if we're following the Taylor Swift curve, it's gonna go bad. But then if we have the someday Strokes curve, when we get over here, I'm doing a visual. I guess you have to watch the YouTube video to see my reverse bell curve.
YouTube.
We're gonna get here, and then we're gonna look back on this low point, and it's
Mm,
gonna like get lifted up to be a high point, and we're gonna miss those times in a
yeah,
way. And then also, I think the lessons of both these songs is just appreciate it when it's there.
yeah.
It could go bad, and we could look at that bad time in the future even further and look at it positively. But in the moment, I guess just try to enjoy it as much as possible.
Totally. Well, I can't think of a better way to wrap up than on that note, right?
Lovely.
Kevin,
I
I know.
have one more. I
Oh,
have one more
please
thing
do.
to say.
Please say
Yeah,
it.
which I think just is to bring it all together.
Hmm.
On Fordham's campus, and this is where I get transported to when Someday comes on.
I know what you're gonna say. I think.
Oh, do you think so? Okay. There's a fountain. Yeah, there's a fountain right in the middle of campus. It's the most scenic area. You're right in the middle of all the foliage, and there's people walking by, and Keating is in the background. And around that fountain is a quote from the Aeneid, and it's Aeneas saying, "Perhaps someday we will look back upon these things with joy." And I just like that so much, and that's what I carry with me, because when Aeneas says this, Troy is burning, the Trojans are homeless, and they're shipwrecked, and he says, perhaps someday we'll look back upon these things with joy.
Mm-hmm.
Times aren't great now, but I think we're going to find the good things will last. And I think that's overall the lesson for both songs. The beautiful imagery stuck with Taylor. She wasn't talking about really the heartbreak. The confusion and misery is there with Julian's voice, but he's still hopeful for the future. And so is Aeneas, and it seems like you and I are today.
I couldn't agree more, Kevin.
Yeah.
That was
The
beautiful.
election week special. The Sunday before election day. Hope for the future.
Man, yeah, I don't know. I hope that this maybe was some respite for the political nonsense that I'm sure is going down when we listen back to this, Kevin, when it comes out. But thank you for spending the hour with me and talking about these songs, which it just means a lot. I've always wanted to get your take on All Too Well in particular, and it feels very fulfilling to get these perspectives.
Yeah. Just adding to just another great song to add to my fall repertoire. I love it. Thanks for introducing me.
Well, anytime. Join us next week when I give Kevin another Taylor Swift assignment and we analyze.
That's the show.
That's the
show now. The rebrand.
That's the rebrand. I love it. We can't call it Her Life if it's just you and me, though. That would be weird. We'll talk about it. But another great episode, Kevin. Seriously, thank you for joining me. Let me do all my sign-off stuff. I don't want it to end. Okay. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to follow us on Spotify or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, feel free to rate and review. You can find us on Instagram at her.blog.life and find our blog posts at herbloglife.online. To see behind the scenes YouTube videos, just search Rachel Malik on YouTube and join us next Sunday for another episode. Maybe Kevin will be there, maybe not. I'm not sure. We're recording way early. I have no idea what's happening on November 8th.
If you need me, I'm here.
You might be here. Taylor Swift, who knows? Okay, Kevin, seriously, thank you so much for another great two-parter. It's always a pleasure. See you soon. I'm Rachel Malik. This has been